Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. This is going to be episode 3 on our series on the Knights Templar. In the early 12th century, two powerful figures like Balduin II of Jerusalem and Warmund of Picquigny. Warmund is a legendary name, to my opinion. The Latin patriarch made a bold decision that would change the course of medieval history. Together, they agreed to support a group of knights who had arrived in the Holy Land as crusaders, granting them unprecedented autonomy. No longer under the command of the canons of the Holy Sepulchre, these men would live as a monastic order, elect their own master, and fight as warriors for Christ. This was the birth of a new kind of knighthood, the foundation of what would become the Knights Templar. These knights, who had arrived in the Holy Land as crusaders, would now separate from the patriarchate and lead their faith independently as a monastic order. It was King Balduin II of Jerusalem who offered first hospitality to the new knightly order. This is mentioned in one other chronicle of the time, written by William, the Archbishop of Tyre, that is considered the first historian of the Crusades. During the same year, noble knights dedicated themselves to the service of Christ and vowed to live forever in chastity, obedience, and poverty. Since they had neither a church nor a permanent residence, the king granted them lodging in his palace, which stood near the temple of the Lord. King Balduin II made a significant gesture, offering them the use of his palace in Jerusalem. We know that Balduin's palace was located south of the esplanade of the mosque, and therefore it was near the Temple Mount. It extended into the area of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where once stood the palace of King Solomon. It was then that Hugh de Pan, our hero that I mentioned last time, and his brothers decided to take the name Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. It's a very long name. The Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon later shortened to become one of the most important monastic orders in history, the Order of the Temple, or simply the Knights Templar. The conflicts that continue to threaten the Holy Land were the driving force behind the rapid growth of the new order around the year 1120. The Templars realized that to grow, they needed reinforcement, well-trained fighting troops, but also money and lands in Europe to carry out their mission. Hugh de Pan decided to return to Europe for a vast recruitment and fundraising campaign. He traveled from country to country through France, Champagne, the Flanders, and England to recruit new soldiers and promote his project. He presented himself at the courts of Europe and as a recruiting agent for the King of Jerusalem. He was received with growing curiosity, and when he explained the aims of the new order, the aristocracy was deeply impressed and supported him. The Templars received substantial donations, quickly becoming increasingly wealthy. Hugh de Pan and the founders of the Order of the Temple knew that another step was needed to strengthen the project, recognition by the highest authority of Christianity of the time. At first, many wondered, are they priests? Are they monks? Are they knights? Where are they? After all, a priest or a monk should not kill, but these men were fighters, knights. For many Christian theologians, the idea of merging prayer and military art was an aberration. To consolidate his community and transform it into a true order, Hugh de Pan had to gain access to the Church of Rome and the Pope for official recognition. So Hugh strengthened his position through marriage to Amélie de Touillon, a Burgundian noblewoman. This alliance tied him to the powerful de Montbard family, from which came André de Montbard, one of the first Templars, and Bernard de Clairvaux, the future spiritual patron of the order. The marriage gave Hugh both noble prestige and religious connection that would prove decisive for the rise of the Templars. Within the Christian church, the key figure was the monk that we already mentioned, Bernard of Fontaine, who would become known throughout Europe as Bernard of Clairvaux when he became a monk and later abbot of the new Cistercian Abbey at Clairvaux. He gained fame as Bernard of Clairvaux. He would be canonized in 1174 as Saint Bernard. Bernard had entered the Cistercian order and in 1115 founded a new abbey at Clairvaux in the Champagne region in France. He came from a family of knights, so he had all the traits of a fighter ready to battle for his principle. He was also a great orator, yet chose to embrace an ascetic life. He became the most influential figure in the church at the beginning of the 12th century. By 1129, Bernard had a moral stature recognized throughout France by both clergy and common people. He saw in the Templar order not only a tool for the defense of Jerusalem, but an opportunity to reform knighthood in Europe. See, you have to know that for over a century before the Crusades, the Catholic Church had felt the need for a radical reform of knighthood. Knights had become a problem, sparking endless feuds and behaving arrogantly. For this reason, Bernard de Clairvaux saw in the Templars a new model for knights, for all knights, and a reference point to abandon conflict and rediscover a vocation closer to God's Word. Before the Crusades, medieval Europe was a battleground for restless knights, whose pride in martial training often led them to have disruptive feuds and tournaments. These warriors were eager to prove their valor with few major wars to fight, clashed over honor of territory, unsettling villages, and burdening peasants. The church, troubled by this chaos, sought to curb their violence through measures like the peace of God. The First Crusade in the year 1096, proclaimed by Pope Urban II, offered a new purpose, calling all these knights to serve as milites Christis, soldiers of Christ, channeling their zeal, if we can say that, into defending the Holy Land, repurposing them. For a time, though, Europe saw relief as these warriors turned their swords to a higher cause, convinced that the new order born in Jerusalem represented an opportunity from the Christian church. Bernard de Clairvaux wrote a text that would go down in history. In his title, he was eloquent in praise of the new knighthood. And he mentions in this document, this is a new kind of knighthood, which fights a double battle against flesh and blood and against the spirits of evil. They live without wives or children, dwell under the same roof, own nothing of their own. They need not fear sin when they kill an enemy, for it is for love of Jesus Christ that they give and receive the mortal blow. They know how to be gentler than lambs and fiercer than lions, so much so that we do not know whether to call them monks or warriors. So here he established an important philosophical reading on the oxymoron of the warrior monks. What Bernard advanced in the De Laude Nove Militiae was a justification for killing an enemy. But that was not the only point. The most important aspect was the contrast he drew between two types of knighthood. On one side was the so-called profane knighthood, knights who owned or sought wealth and fought only to have fine clothes or splendid horses. On the other side was a new kind of knighthood, represented by the Templars, knights who did not crave personal riches, offering their lives and all they possessed for the defense of Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and all of Christendom. It was a higher purpose after all. On January 13, 1129, the authorities of the Catholic Church, inspired by Bernard of Clairvaux, held a council at Troyes. In the last episodes, I mentioned Troyes, but it's actually spelled as Troyes, where delegates of the Pope, members of the clergy, nobles, and representatives of the Order of the Temple gathered. During the council, the first rule of the new order was established and written down. Today, only 10 original copies remain worldwide of this document, including one written in medieval French and preserved at the National Library of Paris. The manuscript opens with the rule of the Order of the Temple. Following this is a list of fasting days that the Templars received directly from the Pope. But the bulk of the manuscript focuses on the rule itself. It's a framework for all Templar activities. This allows us to infer that the manuscript likely came from an important headquarters of the order. It is a work of great value, adorned with splendid miniatures and finally filigreed red and blue initials, highlighting its significance. It is a codex, after all. The code opens with the names of those who participated in the Council of Troyes. The first name is perhaps the most important of all. Cardinal Matthew of Albano, the direct representative of the Pope. Then follows a list of numerous personalities gathered in the Cathedral of Troyes, among them major religious authorities, the archbishops of Reims and Saintes, the bishops of Soissons, Paris, Troyes, Auxerre, and Beauvais, 8 abbots including Bernard of Clairvaux, and nobles such as Count Thibault and Champagne and William, Count of Nevers. Finally, the names of 6 Templars present at the council are listed. Among them, Brother Hugues de Pan, the master of the order. On the 12 sheets of the manuscript written on gold parchment are all the recommendations the council delivered to the members of the order. The frequency of prayers during battle, the care to be given to their horses, and even dietary advice. Just figure, you shall eat meat 3 times a week. Every aspect is addressed in minute detail. Unlike monks, knights cannot fast or keep vigils. They must preserve their strength for battle. Brothers who render great service to the order are exempt from night prayers, with the permission and dispensation from their master. This is a surprising aspect of a unique case within a religious rule, a military code integrated perfectly into the rule itself. Further on, we read that the participants of the Council of Troyes were fully aware that they were opening a new era for the Christian Church. We believe that this new religious life was born in the Holy Land by divine providence. We attest that these knights may kill the enemies of the cross without committing sin. Very important point. For this reason, we deem that you have the right to be called Knights of the Temple. It was the first time the Church formalized the concept that one could kill in the name of Christ and gave a name to its armed branch in the Holy Land, the Order of the Temple. The Council of Troyes officially marked the birth of the Knights Templar and transformed Hugues de Payens into a community in Jerusalem, into a structure under the authority of the Church of Rome. For some, the existence of the Templars was almost heretical. An English chronicle, Henry of Huntingdon, even described them as a kind of new monster. Well, we've seen how by making a elaborated and very erudite philosophical point, by twisting and turning and explaining the terminology that you shall kill in God's name, that you can actually kill in God's name. You are allowed. We create this new group, this new organization that can do the work of the Lord in the Holy Land, killing the infidels, the Muslims. And that's something that is, according to our modern logic, it's something that we cannot really comprehend. But at the time, they had a higher purpose, a higher mission to control the territories in the Middle East. And sometimes are even the most evil and the most unjust and wrong ideals can be transformed into something that can be carried on in the name of a higher purpose. This is episode 3, and thank you very much for following up, and I will see you next time to episode 4.